So you want to learn how to sew armholes and sleeves, attaching and correcting them, etc. One rule of thumb you need to try to remember is that you want your shoulder seam to be right at the crown of your shoulder and your armhole in the joint of your arm joint so that you have good movement. If your shoulder seam is droopy and down past your arm joint, your arms will feel trapped and you will have less movement. So remember that the next time you go shopping for a jacket. Now when it comes to setting in sleeves, I'm going to use the top that I altered as my example. Here you can see my sleeve is too tight, but the seam is at the crown of my shoulder. When I added the gusset, it added a couple of inches to the circumference of the sleeve opening, which I then had to ease in a bit when sewing it to the armhole. And when you understand the dynamics of a sleeve pattern and the way that it's shaped, easing that extra fabric back in really isn't that hard to do. This is a typical sleeve pattern. You will always have a front and back marking, and in between them is the crown of your sleeve. The crown of your sleeve is basically cut on the bias or on the diagonal of your fabric. Between the two small circles is where you sew your row of ease stitching, which helps in easing the fabric back into the armhole. Now, if you like sleeves that are poofy at the top with some gather, you would have a sleeve that would be shaped like this, sort of like a V, skinny down here at your wrist, but open at the top. And so this would need to be gathered for a gathered look like this. Now for my flouncy sleeves that I put into my top, my sleeve pattern looks like this, where it's very open at the top as well as the bottom, because I gathered both the top and the bottom for a nice full effect. Now one correction I can show you is if your shoulder seam is too low and you want to lift your shoulders by pinching your shoulder and down to about here to take out the fullness in a wedge like this. You then measure the pinch, and on the front and back of your pattern, you're basically going to be cutting a wedge like this down to about this point, which opens up your armhole just a bit, so you may need to adjust by taking it in a little bit down the upper side before sewing your sleeve back in. Now, can you add sleeves to a garment that doesn't have any? Well, that all depends on the shape of your armhole. And as you can see, mine is very open, so adding a sleeve really wouldn't work very well. But you could do a sleeve like this, a half sleeve, where it's attached to the front and back half of the armhole opening. Here's an example of how I added a sleeve to a bride's dress when her armhole was very open. Her dress had a side zipper and snapped together at the shoulder. I first had to add mesh to her armpit in the front and back, which then required a longer zipper to close the armhole. I attached the sleeve to the front half of the armhole and then covered the whole area with lace. And on the back, the lace on the sleeve snaps to the back and connects it. I also added a gusset that looks like an eye to the underarm seam for brides so they can lift their arms in their tight mesh sleeves. And these are just a few examples of what you can do with sleeves. I hope that helps.